Welcome back, everyone, to Dread Files. Tonight, we're exploring 10 disturbing true horror stories from the Appalachian Mountains, a place where endless forests and forgotten trails hide more than just wildlife. From hikers who vanished without explanation to eerie encounters deep in the hollers, these stories will make you think twice before wandering too far into the woods. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Dread Files, hit that like button, and share this video with your friends. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks for being here. Now let's get started. I knew something was off the moment I pulled up to the cabin. The GPS had led me down a winding dirt road lined with dense pines, their tops brushing against the foggy sky. I'd been looking forward to a quiet weekend away from the city, a few days of solitude to decompress. The listing on the rental site made it sound perfect. Isolated, rustic, right in the heart of the Appalachians. But now, standing in the gravel driveway, I realized there had been no one around for miles. The cabin itself was older than I expected, its wooden planks weathered and gray, moss crawling along the edges. Windows were dusty but not broken, and there was a faint smell of damp wood and mildew that hit me as I stepped closer. At first, I thought that was normal for an old mountain cabin. I shouldn't have. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The air was cold, even though the sun had been shining when I drove up. I flicked on the light switch, but the bulbs flickered weakly and then died, leaving me in the dim, gray light of the late afternoon. The cabin smelled of dust, mildew, and something else I couldn't place. It was faint, almost metallic, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I shrugged, telling myself it was just the cabin being old, and set my backpack down by the kitchen counter. I went room to room, checking for anything I might need for the weekend: blankets, towels, firewood. Everything looked functional but unused. It was eerily clean in some places, dusty in others, like someone had been half-heartedly maintaining it. I found a small stack of newspapers from months ago on the living room table and a few canned goods in the pantry. Nothing felt personal, nothing felt lived in, and yet, as I walked past the bedroom, I could have sworn I heard something. A faint rustling, almost like a whisper. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the wind in the trees, I told myself. Just the wind. I spent the afternoon exploring the surrounding area, a small clearing with a fire pit and a creek running nearby. The mountains stretched on for miles, dense and green, the kind of landscape that makes you feel small and exposed. I felt a mix of awe and unease. By evening, I had built a fire in the pit and cooked some canned soup over it, the steam rising into the crisp mountain air. I told myself it was fine to feel unsettled. It was isolation after all. But there was a gnawing in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't shake. Something about the cabin, about the way it sat alone in the woods, made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there. Night fell quickly in the mountains, and I retreated inside, lighting the few working candles I'd found. The cabin was colder than I expected, and the shadows seemed to creep along the walls. That's when I heard it again, soft, deliberate whispers coming from somewhere behind the bedroom wall. I froze, straining to listen. The sound was too deliberate to be the wind, too low to be my imagination. My first thought was that maybe there was an animal trapped inside the walls, but then I realized it wasn't scratching or moving, it was words. I couldn't make them out, but it felt like someone was speaking, right behind the thin wood separating me from them. My heart started pounding, and I backed away slowly, bumping into the table. I told myself to calm down. Maybe it was pipe settling. Maybe I was just spooked. I tried to focus on the fire, the soft crackle, anything rational, but my mind refused to settle. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. The whispers faint at first, then growing slightly louder. I thought about leaving, but the nearest town was hours away and my car was parked down the twisting dirt road. So I stayed, pretending the sound didn't exist, covering my head with a blanket, willing it to stop. When I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, I dreamed of someone in the cabin with me, just standing in the corner of the room, their mouth moving, their voice whispering unintelligible words that filled me with cold dread. The next morning, I woke to the smell of smoke. Not from my fire outside, it was coming from inside the cabin. Panicked, I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room. But the fireplace hadn't been used. The smell lingered, acrid, almost like burning hair. I opened the windows, letting in the morning air, but the smell clung to the walls and my clothes. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The floorboards near the bedroom were scratched, deep marks gouged into the wood, as if something had been digging at it from underneath. My stomach dropped. I hadn't noticed that before. I couldn't explain it, but I felt eyes on me, something watching from just beyond the walls. I spent the day outside trying to convince myself I was safe. I hiked up a nearby trail, telling myself I needed fresh air, needed to escape the cabin, even if only temporarily. The forest was beautiful, peaceful even, but the deeper I went, the more I felt it. Something moving behind the trees, just out of sight. Branches snapped softly, leaves rustled, and every time I turned, there was nothing. By the time I made it back to the cabin, my nerves were frayed, every shadow stretching like fingers across the walls. That night, the whispers returned, louder this time. They moved through the cabin like a current, from the bedroom to the living room, circling me, always just beyond comprehension. I tried calling out, demanding someone explain themselves, but only silence answered. Then, faintly, I heard the creak of the floorboards above me, even though the cabin was only one story. My pulse raced. I grabbed a flashlight, shining it into the corners of the room, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating nothing. And yet I knew something was there. I could feel it. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath visible in the pale candlelight. Then I heard it clearly, a whisper right behind me, so close I could feel the air move as the words left its mouth. "You shouldn't be here," it said. My blood ran cold. I didn't sleep the next day. I packed my backpack planning to leave, but when I went to start the car, the engine wouldn't turn over. The battery was fine, I checked, and the gas tank was full. Something was preventing me from leaving. Panic set in. I went back into the cabin, desperate for a solution. That's when I noticed the markings on the walls, faint scratches forming words. I squinted in the dim light. "Leave," it said repeatedly, etched in a way that looked fresh, like it had been carved with intent. I stumbled back, heart hammering, the whispers rising around me, overlapping in a dissonant chorus that made me want to scream. I covered my ears, but the sound penetrated every fiber of me. By nightfall, I was trembling, barricading the doors and windows with whatever I could find. The fire I'd started in the fireplace refused to stay lit, flames flickering and dying instantly. I couldn't see outside, but I could hear it moving. The soft shuffle of feet, a scraping sound along the walls, whispers that didn't stop. I tried reasoning with it, telling myself it was just stress, isolation, cabin fever, but it didn't care. The shadows seemed alive, pooling in corners and stretching across the floor. Every creak, every sigh of the old cabin felt like a warning. Sleep finally claimed me in the early hours, but I dreamt vividly. I was in the cabin, but it was different. Older, darker, with faces pressing through the walls, silent mouths moving, whispering. One of them reached out, fingers slipping through the boards, grazing my skin. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart racing, to find the same marks from my dream etched into the wall beside the bed. My rational mind refused to accept it, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone since I arrived. By morning, I had no choice. I ran to the car, praying it would start. The ignition caught immediately, as if mocking me for waiting. I drove down the mountain road without looking back, the cabin shrinking into the trees behind me, silent, waiting. I didn't speak to anyone about it for weeks, trying to convince myself it was a combination of fear, isolation, and exhaustion. But every time I closed my eyes, I could hear it again, faintly, whispering through the walls of my mind. And sometimes when I tell the story, I swear I feel the temperature drop, like it's still there, still waiting, whispering the same warning. "You shouldn't have stayed. I've never returned, and I don't intend to." But the memory lingers, and I know deep down the cabin isn't abandoned. Not truly. Whoever or whatever was in there is still there, waiting for the next person to underestimate the quiet, the isolation, the shadows in the Appalachian Mountains. And sometimes, late at night, I can swear I hear faint scratches at my own walls, a whisper brushing against my mind, just a reminder that some places are never empty, and some warnings are never meant to be ignored. I'll never forget the smell of the damp wood, the cold that seemed to seep into my bones, or the whispers that told me I wasn't welcome. And I know if I ever go back, even just to prove myself wrong, I'll find them waiting. The last thing I remember before I fled that cabin was a whisper in my ear, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. It said my name. I don't know how it got there, or if it ever left, but I'll never be sure I'm alone again. I remember the moment it all went wrong, like it's etched in my skin. We were on the Buckeye Ridge Trail, a lesser-known stretch in the Appalachians, early September, when the mornings are still crisp, but the afternoons start to drag the heat out of you. The air was damp from an overnight fog, heavy with the scent of pine and wet soil. My friend Tyler and I had planned this hike for weeks. He wanted to finally test his new boots, and I needed the escape from the city's suffocating grind. We'd taken the first fork without marking it properly on the map, and that's when I started noticing little things that felt off. Not dangerous, not yet, just strange. Tyler had wandered ahead a few steps, fiddling with his camera, mumbling something about the perfect angle for the ridge view. I followed at a slower pace, trying to catch up. The trail was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No birds, no rustling squirrels, just the muted crunch of our boots over damp leaves. Then I noticed it. Tyler's footprints had stopped abruptly. I froze, thinking maybe he had stepped off the trail, maybe he was taking a shortcut, but the ground around the trail didn't show any marks. No prints in the mud, nothing. I called his name, half laughing, expecting him to jump out from behind a tree or brush. Silence. My heart started to race, the kind of creeping panic you feel when you realize the world has shifted just slightly, enough to be wrong but not enough to explain why. I retraced my steps, looking for him for any sign. There was nothing. The trail curved sharply up a ridge, and I could just make out the fog rolling over the trees like a thick, slow tide. I called again, louder this time, and the echo came back to me, hollow, distorted. The forest was swallowing my voice. Tyler didn't answer. I backtracked to the last spot I saw him. The mud was soft here, perfect for tracks, and yet only mine, nothing else. It was impossible. I had walked right behind him, seen him laugh at some invisible joke, and now there was no trace he had ever existed. My mind raced, trying to reason it out. Maybe he slipped off somewhere. Maybe he'd gone down an unmarked path. I moved faster now, scanning the underbrush, the steep drops on either side of the ridge, the jagged rocks below. But there was nothing. No broken branches, no snapped twigs, nothing that hinted at a fall. Just emptiness. Then I heard it. At first it was subtle. A snapping of a branch, light but deliberate. I froze, straining to locate it. It came again, closer this time, somewhere just out of sight beyond a thick curtain of oak and maple. I thought I saw movement, just a shadow, something bending behind the trees. But every time I blinked or shifted my focus, it vanished. My stomach turned sour. Tyler had been the kind of guy who'd play pranks, but the air around me didn't feel like a prank. It felt predatory. I started calling his name in short bursts, trying not to scream. The trail narrowed, and the fog thickened. My boots sank into mud that seemed to cling to the soles, slow and unyielding. I could hear the occasional rustle, maybe a squirrel, maybe something else moving quickly in the underbrush, and my chest tightened. My imagination was running, but even if it wasn't, I had to find him. Panic and fear tangled, urging me to run and yet rooting me to the trail, hoping that logic still had some grip here. Hours seemed to pass. The sun dipped low behind the trees and the trail grew darker, shadows melting into the fog. I kept expecting to see Tyler around the next bend, sitting there, joking about scaring me. But there was only the forest, endless and silent. Then I noticed something else. Subtle marks in the mud, not footprints, but indentations like someone had pressed down with the heel of a boot and lifted straight up without sliding forward. They were human, I could tell, but wrong. Every step perfect, like the earth had been unwilling to accept them. I followed those marks. The eerie rhythm of heels pressing and lifting, each one deliberately placed. They led me deeper into the woods, away from the main trail, toward a slope where the fog swirled unnaturally. My rational mind screamed at me to turn back, to retrace my steps, but I couldn't, not yet. Not while Tyler was out there somewhere, potentially hurt. As I moved through the trees, the smell hit me first. Coppery, iron-tinged, sharp, blood. My stomach turned again, bile rising, and I started to run, stumbling over roots, branches whipping my face. The indentations in the mud continued, leading straight to a clearing. There, everything froze me in place. The ground was perfectly smooth except for the marks. My own footsteps now appeared beside the strange heel depressions. But there was no Tyler, no blood, no body. Only the trail, the fog, the oppressive quiet. Then I heard breathing. Not normal breathing, deep and uneven, but slow, deliberate. It came from every direction at once. I spun, trying to see, but the fog played tricks with my eyes. Then movement. A figure, tall, obscured by mist, standing still at the edge of the clearing. It didn't look like Tyler. Its posture was human enough, shoulders and limbs, but the way it hovered, just at the threshold of the trees, felt wrong. My voice cracked as I called out his name, hoping, praying. The figure tilted its head. The fog clung to it like a cloak. I tried to run, my legs pumping furiously, but the trail seemed endless, the forest stretching unnaturally in every direction. Behind me, I could hear the soft crunch of boots, or maybe it wasn't behind me. Maybe it was beside me. I turned again and the figure wasn't there. Only the trail. My boots sank into the mud. I looked down. My own footprints, and beside them the heel depressions, continuing perfectly step by step, as if someone was walking alongside me in perfect silence. I broke into a full sprint, desperate to reach the trailhead. My lungs burned, my heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. The fog swirled, the trees bent in ways they shouldn't, and still I heard it. The heavy, slow breathing, the unblinking presence. I stumbled over a root, fell hard onto the damp earth and looked up. Tyler's backpack was there, lying on the trail, open. No sign of him, no sign of struggle, just empty. Panic turned to cold, crawling fear. I grabbed the pack and rifled through it. Water bottle, snacks, camera. The camera. I pulled it out and the screen flickered on. Photos. Hundreds of photos. All of them taken in the exact spot I had been standing at the clearing. But Tyler wasn't in any of them, only me. And behind me in every photo, if I looked closely, I could see vague shapes, shadows that shouldn't exist, shapes that mirrored my own movements, trailing perfectly behind me. Step by step, I ran the rest of the way out. When I finally reached my car, parked on the edge of the trailhead, the sun had almost set completely. The forest behind me was quiet, serene almost, but I could still feel it, the presence, whatever it was, lingering. I called the authorities, gave them details, showed them the trail, the backpack, the camera. They searched. They couldn't find Tyler. No missing persons reports matched him, no clues. It was as if he had never existed. Weeks later, I went back to the trail once more, stupidly hoping for closure. The fog was the same, the air still sharp with pine and damp earth. I walked slowly, following the path we had taken, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a familiar figure up ahead. My heart leapt. I ran toward it, yelling his name. The figure froze and then vanished into the trees. I stopped dead, scanning every shadow, every branch. Then I noticed the mud. My own footprints ended abruptly. But beside them, heel marks, perfectly aligned, step by step, continued straight into the forest, leading away from the trail, deeper and deeper where no path existed. I never went back. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe he left, maybe he planned some elaborate joke, maybe something unnatural. But late at night, when the fog creeps low into my town, I swear I can feel him, or whatever followed him, behind me. Just out of sight, step by step, always mirroring mine. I check the locks, the windows, even the streets I walk. I feel it there, waiting, perfect and silent. And I can't shake the thought, Tyler disappeared, but his footprints never left the trail. And maybe some things aren't meant to leave a trail at all. I remember the first time I saw the old mine, even before I knew what was waiting inside. It was just after sunset, the kind of dusk in the Appalachian Mountains where the shadows swallow everything except the outlines of trees and rocks. I was with a couple of friends from town. We were all itching for a little adventure, the kind that doesn't involve the crowded trails everyone else was on. The mine had been abandoned for decades, at least according to the locals, and the stories about it were mostly shrugged off as tall tales. Miners trapped, strange lights in the shafts, sounds of pickaxes echoing long after the mine closed. We laughed about it as we hiked up the steep slope, flashlights swinging, but even then there was that weird tension in the air, the kind you can feel crawling over your skin before your brain decides it's fear. The entrance itself looked like a yawning black mouth in the side of the mountain, old wooden supports rotting at impossible angles. The wind whistled through the gaps, carrying the smell of wet earth and decay. I swear I heard something deep inside the mine, like metal scraping against stone, but my friends shrugged it off. "Probably just rocks falling," one of them said. I didn't argue, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't the first people there that day, or even that week. Something in the shadows made my stomach knot. We dropped our packs and lit our torches, stepping into the mine one by one. The air inside was immediately colder, heavier, and damp, with that unmistakable mineral smell that makes your nose sting. My boots made a hollow sound on the uneven floor, and every step seemed to echo longer than it should have. There were old tracks running along the ground, rusted and half covered in dust, but the deeper we went, the cleaner they looked, as if someone had been walking this path recently. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. After maybe 15 minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. That's when I noticed it. The walls weren't entirely empty. Faint scratch marks, dark against the mineral-streaked rock, ran haphazardly in patterns that didn't make sense. I bent down to look closer, my flashlight shaking slightly. There were footprints too, some muddy, some dry, crisscrossing like someone had been pacing. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up and my stomach turned cold. None of us had been here before. No one else should have been here. A low rhythmic tapping started somewhere deep in the mine, like someone hammering slowly on metal. Not continuous but deliberate. It made me freeze mid-step. My friends didn't hear it at first. They were too far ahead, joking and taking pictures, but when I whispered to them, they finally paused. The tapping didn't stop. It echoed back from places I couldn't see. My voice caught in my throat. I tried to tell myself it was just an old support post settling, or maybe the wind, but the cadence was too intentional. Too human. We pushed on deeper into the winding tunnels. Every corner we turned seemed to stretch the mine longer than it should have been, twisting into chambers that weren't on any map I'd seen. I started noticing small piles of rocks stacked at the corners, some in the shape of crude arrows pointing further inside. That's when it clicked. Someone or something was guiding us. My gut screamed to turn back, but my friends were already joking about a treasure at the end of the mine, and I didn't want to be the killjoy. I tried to shake off the fear. That's when I saw it. A shadow, moving just out of reach of the flashlight. I froze, my pulse spiking. My friends didn't see it. It wasn't a person, at least not like a normal person, but it had a shape. Tall, thin, hunched slightly, like it was watching us from just beyond the reach of light. It vanished when I blinked, leaving only the echo of that tapping noise, but I knew it hadn't been my imagination. Something was following us. Or waiting. I whispered for us to stop, my voice barely audible over the echoes. That's when I noticed the walls weren't just scratched. They were carved with symbols, deep grooves forming jagged lines and spirals. The smell hit me then. Copper, iron, blood maybe. My stomach churned and I realized the source wasn't distant. The air itself seemed tainted, thick with something I couldn't identify. I wanted to run, but the tunnels behind us didn't look right. They had shadows where there shouldn't be shadows, corners bending in ways that made my head spin. Then the tapping got louder. And not just tapping, a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, scraping along stone. It was coming closer. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it in my chest, a weight pressing down, a fear that wasn't mine. It was the mine's. My friends started joking nervously, but even they were quiet now. The air seemed to move against us, almost pushing, urging us forward deeper. And in that moment, I realized the stories weren't just stories. The mine hadn't been empty for decades. It had never been empty. We stumbled into a chamber that looked almost like a living space. A crude fire pit, ashes cold but black, some sort of bedding made from old sacks. And then the smell hit fully. Something had been here recently. My flashlight flickered and I could swear I saw figures crouched, watching from shadows too deep to penetrate. I whispered for us to leave. My friends agreed, finally. We turned to retrace our steps, but the tunnel we'd come through wasn't there. The walls had shifted, or we had. Nothing looked familiar. Panic clawed at me. The dragging sound came again, closer, faster. My heart pounded. I grabbed my friend's arm, urging him to run, but it felt like the floor itself was slowing us down, like the mine didn't want us to leave. I could hear breathing now, low and guttural, echoing back at us from everywhere and nowhere. We ran blindly, bumping into walls, slipping in the wet mud, our torches swinging wildly, and the sound followed, relentless. At some point, we reached another chamber, this one smaller, claustrophobic. The walls were covered in faces, scratched into the stone. Eyes hollow, mouths open, some jagged and raw, as if whatever had carved them had done it in anger. My stomach flipped. My breath caught in my throat. The tapping had become a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, right behind me. I turned, nothing. I turned again, still nothing. And then, in the corner, I saw movement. Not a shadow, a person. Or something like a person. It wasn't human, not really. Its limbs were long, too long, bending at angles that shouldn't bend. Its head tilted in ways that made my skin crawl. And the worst part, its eyes, black, endless, reflecting our torches in a way that made it feel like it could see everything inside me. I couldn't look away. I stumbled back, tripping over the uneven ground, and it moved closer without a sound. My friend screamed, finally turning around, but by then it was too late. We ran again, down tunnels that seemed to twist and stretch impossibly. The mine had become a maze. The dragging sound followed, relentless. And sometimes, just at the edge of the light, I saw those eyes again. Watching, waiting. I tried calling out, shouting, but my voice was swallowed by the stone. Eventually, we found a tunnel that looked familiar. Or maybe we were just desperate enough to hope it was. We burst out into the cold night air, gasping, shaking, mud caked to our clothes. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the forest, lights of our town glimmering below. Only when we were safe did we look back, and the mine looked like any abandoned hole in the mountain again. Quiet, still, empty. I wanted to tell myself it had all been in my head. Maybe my friends did too, but I can still hear it sometimes, when the wind is right. That slow dragging, that low, patient tapping, and the faintest whisper of footsteps that aren't ours. I never went back. None of us did, but the thing is, the mine doesn't need us to come back for it to be alive. Every now and then, people go missing in the mountains. Hikers, kids from nearby towns, hunters. They always say the mountains are dangerous. I know better now. The mine wasn't empty and it never will be. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in low and thick, I swear I can see that black shape standing at the entrance, waiting for someone foolish enough to wander in. Even writing this now, I feel it in the back of my mind, the memory of its eyes. I can't explain it fully, can't rationalize it.
And I know deep down that it didn't want to be seen. It wants to be fed.
And if I ever try to go back, even for a second, it won't just be shadows waiting for me. It'll be real and it'll be hungry. I don't know what it is and I don't want to. All I know is that the old mine in the Appalachian Mountains was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. And maybe if you're curious, you'll find out the same way I did. But if you do, I hope you run faster than I ever could. I didn't realize something was wrong until the first night I stayed alone at the cabin. My family owns a small, worn-down place tucked into the Appalachian woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. Usually it's peaceful, the kind of quiet where you can hear the wind scraping against the trees, the rustle of leaves, or a distant creek flowing. But that night, it felt different. Off. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun already tipping behind the hills, painting the forest in deep oranges and purples. I unpacked my things quickly, eager to settle in before dark, but the air felt heavy, almost sticky, like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to being in the mountains and my nerves from sleeping alone, but I should have known better. By the time night fell, the woods were almost alive with sound. Not the usual owls and distant coyotes, but something slower, deliberate. I swear I could hear footsteps crunching leaves behind the cabin, soft at first, then fading when I paused to listen. I told myself it was just deer or raccoons, but the steps weren't random. They followed the path, circling the cabin. I didn't sleep much that night, checking the windows every hour, my phone uselessly low on battery. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow move past the kitchen window, quick and low to the ground like someone crawling. I froze. The shadow stopped. Then nothing. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been my imagination, exhaustion messing with me. I went outside to grab firewood, my boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't animal prints, they were human. Barefoot, muddy, trailing from the tree line to the side of the cabin. My stomach dropped. I followed them back to the woods, curiosity battling fear. The prints were deep, like whoever had made them was heavy, and they disappeared about 50 feet in, where the underbrush grew thick. I didn't go further. I had to tell myself it was probably a hiker, someone passing through, though the thought didn't make me feel any better. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I kept the doors locked, the windows shut tight. I left food out only for myself, kept the firewood stacked neatly, and even carried a small hatchet around when I went outside. But the feeling never left. At night, I could hear things moving in the woods. Soft whispers, low grunts, the snap of branches when nothing should be there. Once I woke to the smell of smoke curling through the cabin. Someone had been there. I checked the windows and doors, everything locked. Nothing taken. I felt eyes on me, always just beyond the edge of the firelight. One evening, I was sitting on the porch trying to ignore the creeping tension when I heard it, a low humming, human, somewhere behind the cabin. Soft, almost like a lullaby. I froze, the hairs on my arms standing on end. It wasn't coming from anywhere I could see. I whispered out into the night, trying to sound brave. "Hello?" No reply, just the humming again, closer this time. I didn't move, my fingers gripping the edge of the porch like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Then it stopped. Silence. The kind that presses on your ears and rattles your chest. The next day, I found more evidence. Little things. A small makeshift fire pit near the edge of the trees. Half-burned sticks arranged in a circle. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a bush. I didn't touch anything, just photographed it with my phone and sent it to my dad, telling him someone might be living out there. He laughed it off over the call. "Mountains play tricks on you, kid. It's probably a hermit or some hiker." I wanted to believe him, but my gut twisted every time I stepped outside. A week in, the sightings became harder to dismiss. I woke one night to the sound of breathing outside my window. Slow, steady, and almost deliberate. My cabin has a small front window that faces the woods, and when I peeked through the blinds, I saw him. A man. Thin, ragged clothes, unkempt hair matted with dirt, standing just beyond the edge of the trees, staring at me. He didn't move for a long time, just watched. My heart raced, my fingers shaking on the glass. And then he turned and vanished into the woods like he had never been there. I didn't sleep that night. I tried to leave, even called a friend to drive out and pick me up, but every time I approached the car, I felt the sensation of being watched. I thought I saw movement at the tree line when I glanced up, just out of my peripheral vision. I didn't run. I walked fast, keeping my eyes forward, gripping the keys like a weapon. That night I slept in my car, windows up, engine running, just to feel safe. Things escalated after that. I started hearing things in the cabin itself. Doors creaking open, cupboards rattling, soft dragging noises across the wooden floors. Once I woke to a faint tapping at my bedroom door. Slow, methodical. I froze, too terrified to move. The tapping stopped. Then in the silence I heard a whisper, my name. Soft, low, barely audible, but unmistakable. My hands were shaking. My phone slipped from my grasp as I bolted from the room to the front door. I didn't stop running until I reached the porch steps, and when I looked back, nothing. Eventually, I found something that terrified me more than footsteps or whispers. A trail leading into the cabin. Not outside, inside. Footprints, wet mud drying into patterns on the wooden floors. They led from the back door, across the living room, to the kitchen. Whoever it was had been inside. That's when I realized the humming, the whispers, the moving shadows. It wasn't just outside. He was inside, and somehow he had been for days without me noticing. The doors were locked, the windows latched, yet the prints were there, clear as day. I confronted the reality that someone was living in the woods behind my cabin. Not camping, not hiking, living. I didn't know how long he had been there, what he wanted, or how he had survived unnoticed. I kept my distance, watching from the porch, trying to catch a glimpse of him moving between the trees, and that's when I saw the small structures. Not cabins or tents, but crude shelters, branches woven together, covered in tarps and leaves. Smoke curling from tiny fires, footpaths connecting them. It wasn't just him. He had a system, a life, and I had stumbled right into the middle of it. The weeks that followed were tense. I didn't leave, but I didn't stay calm either. I carried the hatchet wherever I went, kept every light in the cabin on at night, and refused to sleep more than an hour or two at a time. I started leaving small gifts at the edge of the woods, food, blankets, anything I could spare, thinking maybe appeasing him would make him leave me alone. I don't know if it helped. Some nights I would hear him humming back, almost softly enough to sound like gratitude. Other nights, I would wake to find things moved inside the cabin, pots rearranged, doors open, objects placed where I had never left them. The strangest moment came one afternoon when I went for water at the nearby creek. I saw him, standing on the opposite bank watching me. For the first time, he didn't hide. I froze, unsure if I should approach or run. He raised one hand, slow, deliberate, and I swear I saw him gesture almost like a warning. He didn't speak, didn't move from the bank, just stared until I left. That night, I made a decision. I had to leave, no matter what. I packed quickly, not even bothering to check the windows or doors. I drove down the narrow, winding road, eyes darting to the tree line the entire way. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw movement just past the shadows. My chest tightened, adrenaline pumping like fire through my veins. When I finally hit the main road, lights of nearby towns appearing in the distance, I felt a flicker of relief. But the unease didn't leave. Not really. I kept looking over my shoulder, checking for signs of him following. A week later, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single branch, stripped of leaves, tied with a piece of dirty fabric. I know it's him. I don't know how he knew where I lived or why he sent it, but the message was clear. I am still being watched. I've told friends, family, even the local police, but no one believes me. Mountains, cabin fever, paranoia, they say. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm losing it. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. The woods behind that cabin aren't just empty. Someone lives there, and he has been there a long time, longer than anyone realizes. I don't go near those mountains anymore. I don't visit my family's cabin. I don't even like driving past the small roads that lead to it. And sometimes at night, when I close my eyes, I can still hear him humming, soft and slow, carrying through the trees. Always there, just beyond the edge of the light. Always watching. I moved out here for the quiet. Everyone said the Appalachian Mountains were peaceful, almost too peaceful. I'd been working in the city for years, and the noise, constant honking, yelling, sirens, was wearing me down. When I found the little cabin on the edge of the forest, I thought I'd found my sanctuary. It was old, yes, with creaky floors and the smell of wood polish and decay, but that was part of its charm. The first night, though, I realized something about peaceful that no listing could convey. Something was out there, and it knew me. I was lying in bed, the window cracked just a little for the cool mountain air, when I first heard it, a soft scraping like fingernails against wood. My first thought was a branch. The trees are right outside, and the wind had been picking up all day. But the sound didn't move with the wind. It stayed in one place, deliberately scratching at my window. I froze. The air smelled sharp, metallic like iron. My skin crawled. I strained my eyes, looking into the black. Nothing. I told myself it was my imagination. I had been working too hard, the isolation getting to me. The next night it came back. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Slower this time, deliberate, testing. I got up, flashlight in hand, and approached the window. Outside, nothing. The branches didn't reach that high, and the ground was undisturbed. I tried to laugh it off, but even the sound of my own laugh felt hollow. I slept with the light on, but I didn't sleep well. Every little creak of the cabin made me tense, every shadow outside my window a potential threat. By the third night, I could hear it in the daytime, too. I was chopping firewood, trying to convince myself that the cabin had been a good idea. The sound started faintly at first, barely audible over the rhythmic thwack of the axe hitting wood. Scrape, scrape, like claws on glass. I dropped the axe, hard hammering. The sound came from a window I hadn't opened, the one facing the back of the property. I ran to it. No footprints, no disturbed earth, no branch that could reach it. I started thinking maybe someone was here with me. Someone or something. I started noticing small things. Footprints in the dirt around the cabin. Sometimes two, sometimes more. Often fading before they got close. Doors that were closed when I remembered leaving them open. The air would get cold suddenly, sharp and biting, and my breath would fog the room even in the daytime. I felt watched, constantly, every time I stepped outside. I started checking the windows at night before sleeping, flashlight sweeping across the forest line. The deeper woods were dark, almost black, like the night had swallowed them whole. And the sound always came from the same window, every night with variations. Sometimes scratching, sometimes tapping, like someone testing the wood for weakness. One night I stayed up. I refused to sleep until I caught whatever it was. I sat with my back to the wall, flashlight in hand, and my ears strained for the tiniest sound. Around midnight, the scratching started. Slow at first, then faster. I held my breath, heart thudding so loud I was sure it would echo into the forest. The scratching stopped suddenly. Then a voice, low and dry, like dead leaves rubbing together, whispered my name. My name. It made my skin crawl. I turned the flashlight toward the window. Nothing. The glass was clean, unbroken, and outside the trees swayed silently. After that, I tried talking to people in the nearest town. I told them about the noises, the footprints, the cold spots. They laughed, told me it was nothing, just raccoons, maybe a bear. But their eyes flicked nervously to the forest as they said it. I noticed small signs, too. The local gas station had pamphlets warning hikers about forest watchers, old tales about people disappearing near the backwoods, strange figures glimpsed at night. They said it like it was history, like it didn't matter anymore. But I felt it mattered. To me, anyway. I tried ignoring it. I kept busy, chopping wood, cooking, reading, but the sound persisted. Scrape, scrape, like claws pulling across the glass. One night I saw a shadow outside, just a shape, hunched and thin, moving through the trees, slower than any human, but deliberate. I froze, heart jumping into my throat. It stopped under the window. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. I shone the flashlight, hoping to catch it. Nothing, just the shadow fading into the forest. I started sleeping with the windows shut, but that didn't stop it. Now the scratching came from inside the cabin. The walls, the ceiling, sometimes the floorboards. Scrape, scrape. At night, close, almost right under my bed. I felt like the air itself was watching me, shifting with my movements, holding me still. I tried calling the sheriff. The line went dead when I spoke. Then a whisper, my name again, hissed through the static. I yanked the phone cord from the wall. No one was coming out here to help me. Food deliveries became terrifying. Every car that passed on the narrow dirt road made me jump. I started keeping knives by every door and window. One night I caught something in the cabin. I was in the kitchen, water boiling, when a reflection in the glass of the fridge caught my eye. There was a figure behind me, thin, hunched, completely black against the kitchen light. I spun around. Nothing. The air smelled like wet dirt and rust. I ran to the front door, tried opening it. Locked. I never locked it. Sleep became impossible. Every night, every hour, I heard it. Scraping, whispering, breathing. Sometimes footsteps pacing outside, circling the cabin, stopping just out of reach of the porch light. I tried leaving once. Packed the car, keys in hand, flashlight swinging across the driveway. The forest was silent. I drove 10 miles down the mountain road. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I swear I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just watching, completely still. I didn't look back until I got home hours later, exhausted. The cabin was the same. The door was locked just as I had left it, but a new set of footprints led from the woods to the porch. Sometimes I see it through the windows during the day. Out of the corner of my eye, black shapes moved between the trees, stopping whenever I turned to look. I've started leaving lights on. All of them. At night, the forest glows dimly under the porch lights, and still, I hear scratching. Always scratching. At my windows, my walls, the floorboards. It never stops. I've tried recording it. Cameras, audio, everything. When I play it back, nothing is there, just the normal sounds of the cabin creaking. I'm not safe here. I can feel it. Even typing this, I hear it behind me, scratching at the window nearest the desk. My heart is racing, hands shaking. I know it waits for me to sleep. I've stopped leaving the cabin. I stopped going into the forest, stopped answering the phone, stopped going into town. I just sit here, trying to make it through the night, lights on, doors locked, feeling like the forest itself is pressing in, waiting. I don't know what it is. Human, animal, something else? But I know it knows me. It watches when I move, scratches when I hesitate, whispers when I forget to lock a door. Every night something scratches at my window in the Appalachian forest. And I know one day it won't stop at scratching. One day it'll come inside. I just don't know when. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though I've tried to forget. It started with that restless, nagging feeling that sometimes hits you when you're alone on the road too long, like the world is just slightly off, and you're the only one noticing. I had been driving through the Appalachian backroads on a late October evening, trying to cut a couple of hours off my trip. My GPS had glitched, rerouting me onto some narrow mountain path that wasn't supposed to be there, at least according to the outdated map I had. I knew I shouldn't have taken it. The sun had already dipped behind the ridges, casting the valley into a gray gloom. The trees pressed in close on either side of the road, their branches scratching against the car as if warning me to turn back. But stubbornness or curiosity, or maybe something darker, kept me going. The air had a strange, metallic smell like rust and wet earth mixed together, and every mile I drove seemed to stretch longer than the last. The road twisted unnaturally, sharp corners appearing out of nowhere, and the thick canopy above swallowed what little light remained. I felt watched almost immediately, though I couldn't see anyone. I kept telling myself it was just the isolation messing with my mind, that my own exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw movement in the shadows behind me. Nothing concrete, just a flicker, a sway of branches, or maybe a figure crouched low in the trees. My heart started to hammer in my chest, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. Half an hour into the shortcut, the road disappeared into an incline that felt steeper than the map suggested. My tires slipped on the damp leaves, and I slowed to a crawl, noticing for the first time the deep gouges along the sides of the road, as if something large had dragged itself across the asphalt. That's when I noticed the animal traps. They were crude, metal snares, half buried in the dirt on both sides of the road. I didn't even know people still set traps out here. A sense of unease crept through me that had nothing to do with the road. These traps were different, fresh, with hair caught in the teeth of one. Dark, coarse hair. It didn't belong to any deer I had ever seen. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that I'd just driven through someone's hunting ground. Still, the feeling of being watched intensified. Then I saw it. Or I think I saw it. At first, I thought it was another animal. A deer, maybe, standing dead still in the middle of the road ahead. My headlights caught its eyes, or what I first thought were eyes. They were too big, too bright, almost reflecting the light back at me unnaturally. And then it moved. Its limbs were wrong. The angles of its knees and elbows bent like they weren't supposed to, all jagged and unnatural. It crouched low to the ground, but when it turned toward me, I saw the face, or at least the suggestion of a face, thin, pale, stretched, like someone had taken a human mask and carved it over something else entirely. I slammed the brakes, my car skidding over the wet leaves, and it just stared. Not running, not attacking, just watching. I tried to back up, but the incline made the car almost impossible to maneuver. That's when I noticed the whispers. Low, almost like the wind, but words. I couldn't understand them at first. Just a hissing murmur that made my skin crawl. And then clearer, my name. It wasn't loud, but it hit me like a hammer. You shouldn't be here, Huzaifa. My heart stopped. I hadn't said my name aloud. I was alone. I had to be alone. I checked the mirrors obsessively, every shadow now a threat. The thing, whatever it was, hadn't moved. Just stood there, watching, waiting. I tried the headlights again, flicking the high beams on and off, desperate to see it clearly. The moment I did, I caught something else in the periphery. Figures. 3 of them now, crouched low among the trees. Not fully human, not fully animal. Their skin had the color of clay, dry and cracked, blending almost perfectly with the tree trunks. And then, a realization that made my stomach turn. I wasn't on a road anymore. I was in the middle of something old, something that shouldn't exist on a map. The road ended abruptly, swallowed by the roots of ancient trees, and the only way forward was a narrow dirt path that seemed to wind upward endlessly. The GPS was spinning wildly, recalculating, but it was useless. No matter which way I turned, the path seemed to circle back, the trees closing in tighter. I knew I had to keep moving, had to escape, so I edged forward. Each foot of progress felt like pushing through molasses. The whispers followed, sometimes from behind, sometimes from the side. Sometimes they were close enough that I could feel hot, dry breath on my neck. I dared not look. I dared not stop. The road, if it could still be called that, started to slope downward into a small clearing, and I saw signs of life. Or at least human life, I told myself. Old cabins, abandoned maybe, wooden and rotten, smoke curling lazily from one of the chimneys. Relief washed over me for a brief moment, but it didn't last. As I drew closer, I realized the smoke wasn't smoke. It was mist rising from the ground, thick and clinging, like the forest itself was exhaling. And then the door of the cabin creaked open, revealing a figure. Tall, thin, but hunched in a way that made every movement wrong, jagged. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were black holes, and it smiled. Or I think it smiled. Its mouth stretched too wide, far wider than humanly possible. I tried to reverse, but my car stalled. The engine died. I was trapped, I ran. I didn't think. Branches tore at my arms, mud sucked at my shoes, but I ran until the mist swallowed the clearing. And then I tripped, fell hard, scraping my knees, and looked up. The figure was gone. The whispers faded. For a few seconds I thought I was safe. Then I heard a snap behind me, just like someone stepping on dry twigs. I froze, and that same voice, low and deliberate, whispered again, "Why do you run from what's already seen you?" I spun around. Nothing. The forest was empty. Silence pressed down, heavier than the night air. I crawled forward, dragging myself through the underbrush, following a vague trail that might have been a path. Hours or minutes I couldn't tell. Later, I stumbled back onto a recognizable road, the GPS blinking normally again. I didn't stop running until the first lights of the town appeared on the horizon. When I finally reached my motel, I locked the door and stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight in hand. I wanted to convince myself it was a hallucination, exhaustion, a mix of rural isolation and bad luck. But I can't, because when I checked my car the next morning, the passenger side mirror was broken. And etched into the dirt on the hood was a symbol I had never seen before, a twisted circle, almost like a distorted human face staring back at me. And there were footprints, not human, not entirely, large, clawed, and heading back into the mountains. I didn't follow them. I couldn't. Even now, I can't stop thinking about it, about the way it watched me, waited and smiled, about the whispers calling my name, promising I wasn't done yet. I tried to tell people. Friends laughed it off, said I'd had a nightmare or hit my head on a branch. But I know what I saw. I know the forest holds something that shouldn't exist, something ancient, something patient. And some nights when the wind rustles through the trees near my apartment, I swear I hear that voice again, soft and deliberate, whispering my name. The thing in the Appalachians didn't just watch me. It marked me, and I know somehow it will wait until I come back. I haven't gone back. I haven't wanted to. But sometimes I dream I'm back on that road, the branches clawing at my car, the whispers swirling around my head, and I can't escape. And then I wake up, and my heart is hammering, and the memory of its eyes, the way they reflected the headlights, is burned into my mind. I think about it every time I drive past a mountain road, every time I hear leaves rustling in the wind. I know now that some shortcuts aren't just dangerous, they're impossible to survive. And I don't know if I'll ever be free of that forest, or the thing that waits in it. Some nights I swear I can still hear it calling. I didn't expect the mountains to feel so alive, not in the way I realized they were that summer. I had gone up to the Appalachian foothills mostly to escape my city life, to get some quiet and maybe take pictures for a small side project I was working on. I was staying in a little rental cabin a few miles from the nearest town, tucked beside a creek that twisted through the valley. It looked picturesque, perfect even, but I learned pretty quickly that in the mountains, perfection can hide a kind of patience you don't understand until it's staring at you. The first time I noticed him, I didn't think much of it. I was walking along the creek, camera in hand, trying to catch the light filtering through the pines, and there was a man standing on the opposite bank. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. His clothes were old, faded, the kind of worn jeans and flannel that seemed permanent, like part of him had grown out of the forest itself. I waved out of politeness, expecting him to wave back, but he didn't. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching. I shrugged it off, thinking he was one of the few locals who still wandered these woods. Over the next few days, I kept seeing him. Sometimes from the porch of the cabin, sometimes further down the creek where I wandered to get better shots. Always at the edges of my vision, always watching. I told myself I was being paranoid. The mountains can play tricks. The light and shadow make things seem closer than they are. One evening I stayed out later than I should have. The sun was bleeding red into the trees and the creek sounded louder somehow, more urgent. I noticed the man again, closer this time. He didn't move when I froze mid-step, staring at him. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but I could make out the lines, deep and rough, like the kind of face that had been carved by the wind and sun for decades. My stomach sank. I hadn't realized how much fear had settled into my chest until I felt the cold crawl of it. That night, I thought I was imagining things. I kept hearing small noises outside the cabin, the rustle of feet in dry leaves, the faint snap of a branch, but whenever I peeked out, the yard was empty. I told myself it was animals, deer, raccoons, coyotes, anything but a man watching me while I slept. Then came the footprints. I hadn't noticed them at first, but the morning after that night, I saw them. Heavy, uneven prints in the soft mud near the creek, leading from the water line up toward the cabin and stopping at the edge of the porch. They didn't continue past the porch. They didn't have any human pattern I could make sense of. They were too large, too wide. I stared at them for a long time, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone else was staying nearby. Maybe someone had been fishing and didn't want to be seen. But that afternoon, when I was photographing the creek, I felt it. The feeling of eyes burning into the back of my neck, following every movement I made. I turned, expecting the usual shadowy figure across the water. He was gone. I scanned the tree line, the creek, the rocks, but nothing. My chest tightened. I stayed until dusk, snapping photos more out of nervous habit than interest, and then ran back to the cabin. The next morning, I woke to find a note slipped under the door. My handwriting. I know it sounds insane, but it was true. On the little scrap of paper, in shaky letters I didn't recognize as my own, it said, "I know you're watching." I tore it up and burned it in the stove. My hands were shaking, but I convinced myself someone had found my cabin and played a cruel prank. I tried to laugh it off, but even as I forced the joke, I noticed the shadow by the creek. He was leaning on a stick, just watching, the same indifferent stare. Over the following week, I didn't leave the cabin alone anymore. I felt like a rabbit, every step calculated, every glance over my shoulder. I started seeing things in the woods, glimpses of a face behind trees, movement in the underbrush. But when I turned, nothing was there. At night, I kept the lights on and a heavy stick beside the bed. I wanted to tell myself I was safe. I wanted to believe that rational thought could protect me, that logic could outrun instinct. But instinct has a way of noticing things before you consciously do. One morning, I woke to find the door wide open. I don't remember unlocking it the night before. The lock was old, a simple deadbolt, but the bolt was slid to the side as if someone had been there, stood in my cabin while I slept. The first thing I noticed, the thing that made my stomach twist into knots, was the smell. Wood smoke, damp earth, and something else I couldn't place, a metallic tang like blood, faint but unmistakable. I ran to the creek, camera in hand, hoping to catch something, anything. That's when I saw him clearly. He was crouched on a rock in the middle of the water, just watching, unblinking. For a moment, I thought he might vanish, like a trick of light. But he didn't. And then he spoke, in a voice low and gravelly, words that sounded like they were torn from the air itself. "I know what you're thinking." I dropped the camera. The water splashed over my boots as I scrambled back to the cabin. I wanted to leave, but the car was parked in a way that made it feel miles away, blocked by overgrowth and winding paths I couldn't remember seeing before. The mountains had shifted somehow, or maybe I had. Over the next few days, I barely slept. I started hearing him at night, footsteps circling the cabin, soft, deliberate, then gone. I caught glimpses through the windows, a shadow by the trees, always standing, always watching. I tried leaving the cabin during the day, only to find the paths around the creek twisting in ways that didn't make sense. Rocks that were farther away yesterday were now close. A tree that leaned north yesterday now angled west. It was subtle but enough to make me feel trapped. And then came the screaming. I woke one night to a sound that wasn't human, not exactly. A high, keening wail that rattled through the walls of the cabin. It lasted for only a few seconds, but it burned into my ears, and when I finally dared to look out the window, he was standing there, close enough that I could see the lines of his face illuminated by the moon. His mouth moved, but no sound came out, just lips twisting into shapes I couldn't decipher. I left the cabin the next morning, packing in a fevered panic. I drove down the mountain, leaving my camera, my gear, even my phone behind. I didn't stop until the foothills flattened into suburbs, until streetlights replaced stars, until the creek was a distant memory. It's been months since that summer. I tell people I had a cabin incident, that the mountains played tricks on me, that stress and isolation made me paranoid, but I haven't stopped seeing him. Sometimes in the corner of my eye at home, a man in flannel and worn jeans standing silently, watching me. Always watching. I've never told anyone about the note, or the smell, or the way the paths shifted. People would call me insane, but I know what I saw. I know he exists waiting. And sometimes when I dream, I hear the creak again, and I feel him near, just beyond the trees, knowing exactly what I'm thinking, knowing exactly when I look. I don't know why he chose me, or why he watches. I just know that I can feel it even now as I type this. Watching, waiting. Maybe he's always been there. Maybe he's always been waiting for someone foolish enough to wander too close. And I can't stop thinking about the creek, about the cabin, about the way he didn't move when I froze in terror, about the way he knew I was looking at him, because I was, and somehow he knew. I don't even know where to start because nothing about that night makes sense. And the more I think about it, the less I understand what really happened. I had been planning this trip for weeks, my first solo camping adventure in the Appalachians. I wanted something quiet, something off the grid, where the air smelled like pine and wet leaves and the only noise was the wind and maybe a creek somewhere. The drive up was beautiful, the kind that makes you feel alive in a way city life never does, with rolling hills and fog hanging low over the ridges. I found a small, secluded clearing that looked perfect for my little tent and my fire pit, and I unpacked as the sun began to set, the orange light brushing against the trees in long, trembling shadows. The air was sharp with that cool mountain scent, and I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed, just me and the wilderness. I set up my tent, stacked some firewood, and made a small dinner of instant noodles because I didn't want to carry much. Everything felt strangely peaceful. The crackle of the fire, the occasional rustle of leaves, a bird calling somewhere far away. It all felt like a private world I'd walked into. I was careful to keep a small flashlight on me and my phone fully charged, though I knew service was patchy out here. As darkness settled, I felt a thrill, the kind you get when you're alone and the world is just your own. I told myself it was just nerves, the kind you feel when you're not used to being alone in the woods. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I brushed it aside. It was just the wilderness, I told myself. I was fine. The first few hours were uneventful, almost meditative. I lay back on a worn blanket, watching the stars pierce the black sky through gaps in the tree canopy. Everything was quiet, too quiet maybe, but in a way that felt comforting. I told myself stories about the woods being alive, about animals rustling around my tent, and laughed at the thought. But then I started hearing small things, barely there, like the snap of a twig underfoot, distant but deliberate. Every time I turned my head, trying to peer into the shadows, nothing moved. Just trees, just night. My heartbeat sped up, but I told myself it was the adrenaline talking. I eventually crawled into my sleeping bag, hoping warmth would calm my nerves. I was lying on my back staring at the little mesh roof of my tent when I heard it. Breathing. At first I thought it was my imagination, maybe my own breath echoing in the tent. But it wasn't mine. Slow, deliberate, wet, ragged breaths that didn't belong to me. I froze, my skin prickling. I told myself it had to be an animal outside, maybe a deer or even a raccoon, but the rhythm of the breathing was human. I held my breath, straining to hear. It didn't move away. It stayed just there. The darkness outside the tent felt oppressive, like it was pressing against the thin fabric, and every snap and rustle made me jump. I slowly reached for my flashlight, heart hammering, but before I could click it on, the zipper of my tent moved. Just a slight shift, barely audible, but enough to send a cold spike down my spine. I froze, eyes wide, mouth dry. Then the breathing changed. Closer, heavier, right at the edge of the tent. I could feel it, like hot, damp air brushing my face. My throat closed up, my limbs refused to move. I tried to whisper, but no sound came out. My hand fumbled for my phone, found it, and held it up like a shield. I told myself if I just stayed still, maybe whoever, or whatever, was there would leave. But then I felt it. A warm, wet exhale directly on my neck, right through the thin sleeping bag material. My body went rigid. My mind screamed at me to run, but my arms were paralyzed. I could barely even breathe. The person, if it was a person, was close enough that I could feel their presence, the heat of them, their intentional, deliberate closeness. I don't know how long that went on. Seconds, minutes, time stretched into something horrible. Then I heard a whisper, soft but unmistakable, right at my ear. "Don't move." The sound was wet and guttural, like someone trying to control their own breathing. My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't work. I thought maybe it was some kind of prank. Maybe one of the locals knew I'd be camping here. But then I realized I hadn't seen a single person for miles. Nobody else knew I was coming here. I was alone. And yet I wasn't. Somewhere deep in my mind, a thought emerged, a horrific possibility I didn't want to acknowledge. I was being watched, and someone had been following me. Maybe the snaps of twigs earlier weren't animals. Maybe the quiet that felt peaceful was just the silence before something terrible. I wanted to run, to rip open the tent and sprint, but fear kept me rooted. My fingers shook so badly I dropped my phone. It hit the ground with a dull thud and the breathing stopped instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. I barely slept after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone crawling into my tent, watching me, waiting. Shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense. I convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. But then I saw it. Footprints. Muddy, wet, and unmistakably human. They led from the edge of the clearing, stopped right at my tent, and disappeared into the dark. I checked and rechecked. There was no animal that made prints like that. No random trail could stop so precisely and close. Someone had been there, right at my sleeping bag, and they had left without a sound. By morning, I didn't know what to do. I packed everything up as fast as I could, my hands shaking, my heart still racing. I told myself to call the police, but there was no signal. I kept looking over my shoulder as I drove down the winding mountain road, half expecting to see a figure following me. The feeling didn't leave, even when I was back in town, surrounded by cars and people and noise. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the hot, ragged breath again, right at my neck, warning me not to move. I tried to explain it to friends, but they all thought I was overreacting. "It was probably a raccoon," someone said. Maybe a bear, but nothing made sense. Nothing explained the whisper. Nothing explained the footprints that ended at the tent. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside my personal space, knowing exactly where I slept, exactly when I was most vulnerable. The worst part, I think they know I remember. Since that night, every time I camp, every time I step into the woods, I feel eyes on me. Sometimes I think I hear the breathing again, faint and deliberate, like a shadow stalking just beyond the trees. And I know I'll never go back to that clearing in the Appalachians. But part of me will always wonder who or what was there. And that part of me will never be able to forget. Even now, typing this in my apartment, I feel it sometimes. That same wet, hot breath brushing against my ear. I check the locks. I double-check the windows. I tell myself I'm being paranoid. But I know I'm not. I can still hear the rustle of leaves in the dark, the snap of a twig somewhere that shouldn't be. And every time it happens, I'm back in that tent, frozen, hearing someone breathing on me, knowing that I was never really alone. The thing is, I still can't explain why they left, or why they didn't do more. Maybe they wanted me terrified. Maybe they wanted me to remember. All I know is that night changed me. I don't sleep well. I can't camp. I avoid trails I used to love. And every so often, when the wind blows through my apartment window, I hear it again. That same ragged human breath right at my neck, warning me. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, because I know now that the woods aren't just empty. Sometimes someone or something is waiting, and if you're alone, you're theirs, even if you never see them. I remember the first time I saw the cabin. It was late October, the kind of late afternoon where the sun slants low and the shadows stretch like claws across the forest floor. I was hiking a trail I'd never taken before in the Appalachians, just trying to escape the city for a weekend. The cabin looked old, abandoned, almost swallowed by the trees, and I shouldn't have gone near it. My gut told me to stay away, but something, curiosity I guess, pulled me closer. I stepped over the mossy threshold, the boards creaking under my boots. There was a faint smell of damp wood and decay. It didn't smell like animals had been living there exactly. It smelled like the walls had absorbed human presence and left it behind, like the cabin remembered something I didn't yet know. The first thing I noticed inside was a diary. It was sitting on a table in the corner, the leather cover cracked and fragile. I didn't even have to touch it to feel its weight. It pressed down on my chest like an accusation. I flipped it open and my heart stopped cold. On the first page, in ink that looked like it had been freshly applied, was my name. I froze. My name written there in sprawling cursive, followed by today's date. That was impossible. I'd never been here before. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I stared at the page, my fingers trembling. The diary didn't smell like the cabin. It smelled like iron, like blood. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, that maybe someone had broken in before me and was messing with visitors, but there was no sign of other people. No footprints, no trash, nothing except the diary. I started flipping through the pages, my pulse thundering in my ears. Each entry was dated, starting years ago, but it read like it was happening now. I read about visitors, hikers, trespassers, all of them described exactly as I looked, wearing the same colors, carrying the same backpack. Each one went into the woods, each one vanished. There was no pattern to their disappearance, no note left behind. Just this diary, documenting everything. And every time a name appeared, it ended with, "He came for me at the cabin." My stomach turned. I kept thinking, this is ridiculous. It's just a diary. Someone's messing with me. But the more I read, the heavier the air became, like the cabin itself was breathing around me. I swear I could hear it sigh when I turned a page. The walls seemed to close in as the sun sank lower. Shadows pooled in the corners and I started feeling eyes on me, though I was alone. Every time I glanced up from the diary, it was like the room had shifted, like the cabin had rearranged itself just to watch me better. I tried to leave, but the door I had walked through was gone, or maybe it had always been boarded over from the outside. I couldn't tell. Panic started to creep in, cold and sticky. I ran to a window, but the glass was smeared, distorted. I could see shapes moving outside just beyond the tree line, tall and thin, always at the edge of my vision. I blinked and they were gone. I told myself it was my imagination. I told myself that the diary was a clever prank left by some sick hiker group, but my chest ached with the knowledge that it wasn't imagination. Something was watching, and it knew my name. I dropped the diary in a panic and stumbled to the far corner. That's when I saw it, a scratch on the wall, deep and long, fresh. The wood splintered under my eyes. I could hear it, a faint whisper, almost like my name, carried on the wind through the broken boards. I knelt, pressed my ear to the floor, and heard the faint scuffing of boots, or maybe claws, on the other side of the wall. I tried shouting, but my voice was swallowed by the thick timber. I was trapped. The diary had predicted me. I knew it, and it was only getting started. I remember trying to hide, crawling under the table where the diary had lain, pulling it close as if it could protect me. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing. The entries had changed. New pages, blank before, were now filled with my actions. Every tremble of my hands, every gulp of air, even my internal panic, written in ink I couldn't see forming, like it was documenting my thoughts before I even thought them. My name appeared again, multiple times, with phrases like, "He doesn't know what's coming," and "I am waiting, always waiting." I ripped the diary away and threw it across the room. It landed open, and I swear the page flipped itself back to my name. I could feel it pulsing, almost alive, like it was breathing with the cabin. I knew I wasn't leaving without it. Somehow, it had to come with me. But the second I touched it, the cabin seemed to exhale sharply, knocking me backward. I hit the wall, and the diary slid from my fingers across the floor, stopping at the center of the room as if inviting me to pick it up again. I don't know how long I stayed there, trapped in that nightmare. The light died entirely, the forest outside swallowed by dusk. My phone had no signal, of course, and even if it did, I don't think I could have called anyone. I was too aware that it, whatever it was, knew me now. The diary knew me. The cabin knew me. I could hear my own heartbeat, echoing in the hollow space, loud enough that I was certain it could hear it too. And then came the sound of scraping, low and rhythmic from above. The ceiling had beams I couldn't see before, or maybe I hadn't wanted to. Something was moving across them just above my head. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry, parched. I felt a cold pressure on my shoulder and spun around. Nothing but the diary. Open again on the floor, pages fluttering as if blown by an invisible wind. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt wrong, but I knew the moment I left would matter. The entries in the diary started giving instructions. Not in clear words, but in the tone of commands. Sit, wait, don't look. If you move too soon, it will remember. Every page was a trap, a test, a countdown I hadn't agreed to. I didn't know if it wanted to kill me or just watch or make me part of it. I felt like a mark in a game I hadn't joined. And then I heard a whisper right next to my ear, soft but deliberate, my name. I jumped, swore, and hit the wall again. It had come closer without me seeing it. I was shaking, screaming in my own head, trying to think rationally, trying to remember any survival tips, anything about cabins in the woods, anything about leaving a place alive. I had nothing. I was just a person in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the cabin had chosen me. I tried the windows, tried the doors again. Every exit was gone. Every path I had taken into the cabin had vanished as if the cabin itself had shifted. I fell to the floor, hugging my knees, my eyes glued to the diary. I didn't want to read it anymore, but I couldn't look away. The words had become urgent, almost screaming now. You are mine. You belong here. You will write. You will write, or you will never leave. And then, in a handwriting I didn't recognize, a new sentence appeared. I am inside you now. My blood froze. I realized I had been talking to it, maybe thinking about it, but somehow that alone had allowed it inside. I could feel a presence in my mind, pressing, observing, judging. I don't know how long I stayed like that, rocking, reading, staring, listening. The cabin wasn't just a place anymore. It was a living entity, and I was a part of it. Or maybe it was a part of me. At some point, I don't remember how, I got up and started walking in circles, touching the walls, touching the diary, muttering my name, begging for sanity. And that's when I heard something outside, faint but real. A car engine. Not far, not enough to save me maybe, but someone was coming. I thought about screaming, thought about running toward the sound, but the diary snapped itself open to a new page, and it wasn't blank. It read, "Do not leave. They will never see you." I stared at it, frozen. My name again, written in the thickest, boldest letters yet. My own hand hovered over the page as if it wanted to write back, as if it demanded I obey. I didn't dare. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. The car drove past, slow and deliberate. I don't know if it even saw the cabin. I didn't move. I just sat, trembling, waiting. Finally, in a moment of exhaustion, I crawled over to the diary and picked it up. It felt heavy now, like it had grown in my hands, like it was filled with lead. I opened it one last time. There was a page I hadn't seen before. The next visitor will ask your name. Tell them everything. I slammed it shut. I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't explain. But the diary pulsed in my hands, insistent. I felt it inside me now, alive, breathing with me, waiting. It had learned my fear, my patterns, my weakness. And the worst part, I knew it would never let me leave. Not really. Even if I walked out tomorrow, even if I escaped, it would follow me. It would write me into its pages over and over again until there was nothing left of me but my name in ink. I left the cabin that night, or maybe it let me leave. The path was back, the trees aligned as they should, and I stumbled onto the trail. I didn't look back. But every night since, when I close my eyes, I see it. The cabin, the diary, the empty rooms, and that weight pressing on me. Sometimes I wake up and the smell of damp wood and iron is in my room. I swear I hear scratching at my windows, whispering my name, softly at first, then louder. I've tried to burn the diary, throw it in rivers, leave it behind. It always finds its way back, open on my desk, blank pages waiting, whispering, I know you. I am inside you now. I don't know what it wants exactly, only that it remembers. It remembers me, and I am powerless. Every hiker I see, every cabin I pass, I think about warning them. But the diary, no, the cabin, has taught me one thing. It is patient. It waits. And someday it will call my name again, and I will answer, because it knows I will. I didn't realize I was being followed until I got home. I'd spent the weekend hiking the Appalachian Trail, the section near Roan Mountain, thinking a long weekend in the woods would clear my head after everything with work and life had piled up. It was late October, the air crisp but not freezing, the leaves a fiery red and orange that crunched underfoot as I moved along the trail. I'd hiked alone before, but something about this trip felt different. From the start, there was a heaviness in the air, a kind of quiet that pressed down harder than usual. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the isolation talking. The hike itself was fine at first. I passed other hikers, exchanged short hellos, and admired the distant ridge lines glowing in the late afternoon sun. The trail narrowed at times, twisting through thick hardwood forests, and the sound of my boots on the dirt was the only thing breaking the silence. Around midday on the second day, I felt it, a sense that someone or something was watching me. I stopped mid-step, scanning the trees, expecting to see a lone hiker peeking from behind an oak. Nothing, just the sway of branches and the occasional call of a crow. I laughed at myself, muttering that my imagination was running wild. By evening, I set up my tent in a small clearing near a creek. The sun dipped behind the mountains faster than I expected, leaving long shadows that twisted and shifted over the forest floor. I'd eaten lightly, boiled water for coffee, and crawled into my sleeping bag early. That night, the wind carried strange noises. Not the normal rustle of leaves or branches snapping, something softer, deliberate. Footsteps? I couldn't tell. I froze every time I thought I heard it, heart hammering against my chest. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I fell asleep, though every snap of a twig made me jolt awake. The next day, I took a longer route down the trail, hoping that by morning I'd shake off the unease. The feeling lingered, though, like a weight at the back of my neck. Birds flew off in sudden bursts, and I caught glimpses of shadows that didn't belong, fleeting glimpses from the corner of my eye. I kept telling myself it was a deer, a raccoon, or just a trick of the sun on the branches. I reached the end of the trail by late afternoon, parked my car in the small lot at the base, and loaded my backpack. I thought the tension would dissolve once I was in my car, surrounded by civilization. But the moment I started the engine, I noticed a car in the lot across from me, its headlights dim but fixed on me. It was empty, or seemed empty, but my stomach dropped. I waited, but the car didn't leave. I shrugged it off again, telling myself hikers or locals might still be around. I drove home, taking back roads to avoid the highway, feeling the lingering tension tighten in my chest. The first night back, I slept fitfully. I kept dreaming about the trail, the same narrow paths, the shadows, and the soft, deliberate footsteps. When I woke, my apartment felt wrong, like something had shifted in my absence. Small things were out of place. A chair slightly moved, a window I was sure I'd closed left cracked, and the faint smell of earth mixed with pine in the air. I told myself I must be imagining it. By the second night, I was certain I wasn't imagining it. Around 2 a.m, I heard it, scraping on the outside of my balcony. My apartment is on the 3rd floor. I froze, straining to listen, footsteps retreating into the darkness. I didn't call the police. I felt stupid thinking someone could have climbed up there unnoticed, but the primal part of me knew it wasn't normal. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, checking every lock, peeking through the blinds every 10 minutes. Over the next week, the feeling followed me everywhere. At work, I'd get chills for no reason, imagining shadows moving just behind my desk. At the grocery store, I thought I saw a figure in a hoodie in the parking lot, always on the opposite side, always watching. Friends said I seemed jumpy, paranoid. I laughed it off, but inside I knew the truth. Something had come back with me from the trail. One evening, I went to take out the trash, just a small bag, and noticed prints in the dirt by the dumpster. Prints too large and elongated to be human, almost claw-like. I froze. My apartment complex is fenced, no easy way in. And yet, there they were, fresh and deliberate, leading back toward the building. I took a picture, hands shaking, and ran back inside. Sleep became impossible. Every night I'd hear scratching at the windows, the faintest whispers in the darkness. I could feel eyes on me when I showered, when I cooked, when I sat at my desk pretending to work. I started carrying a baseball bat, checking every corner before moving. I thought about leaving, but the thought of packing up, moving, and being followed again made my chest tighten. Then, it happened. I was on a late-night walk, trying to clear my mind, when I saw movement in the streetlight ahead. A figure, tall, thin, hunched at odd angles. I froze. It didn't run or approach, just watched. I wanted to move, to turn back, but something rooted me to the spot. I realized with a cold shock that it was following me. Not fast, not aggressively, but with purpose. I sprinted. My lungs burned. My heart felt like it would burst through my ribs. I didn't dare look back. When I reached my apartment, I slammed the door, locked everything, and backed away against the wall. Silence. For a few minutes, nothing. Then, faint scratching at the balcony. I called my friend, my brother. anyone who could stay with me. No one was available. I debated leaving the city, going somewhere far, but I didn't want to give it a chance to follow me further. The nights after were worse. The footsteps came inside. Small things moved. Doors I'd locked opened slowly. I started leaving lights on, but the feeling didn't fade. I tried to film it, but the cameras never captured it clearly. Just shadows, just the sense of presence. My sleep became nightmares, dreams of being back on the trail. Pursued, always just out of reach, and then waking to the sound of movement in my own apartment. A week later, I found something on my balcony, a small bundle of sticks arranged in a crude arrow pointing toward my front door. I couldn't explain it. No one could have left it without me seeing. Fear clamped around my chest, sharp and burning. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't leave the apartment. I didn't eat much. I stayed awake, staring at the door, listening to every creak, every sigh of the building settling. I started to notice patterns. Every time I turned my back, every time I left a room, something shifted. A shadow would linger longer than it should. A cold draft would brush my neck, though every window was closed. And always the faintest scrape, the hint of movement, as if it knew exactly where I was. I don't know how long it's been following me. Days, weeks. My sense of time is fractured. I stopped answering calls from work. I barely go outside. Every time I think about the trail, about that last night in the clearing, I feel it again. The weight, the pressure, the certainty that something followed me home. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it chose me. All I know is that it's patient, waiting, watching, and I don't think it will ever stop. Sometimes when I sit perfectly still, I can feel it close, just behind me, waiting for me to notice. I can't leave. I can't run, and I don't know how to make it go away. Last night I woke to the sound of breathing in my bedroom. Not mine. Slow, deliberate, almost satisfied. I checked the balcony, the windows, every corner. Nothing. But I know it's here. I know it always has been. And now, writing this, I can feel it leaning closer, listening as I describe it, as if it's reading over my shoulder. I don't sleep anymore. I don't know if I ever will. Sometimes I hear my name whispered. Sometimes just a soft shuffling behind the walls. And I know I'll never be truly alone again. Something followed me home from the Appalachian Trail, and I think it's staying.